Hello again, and welcome to another exciting episode of Social Studies. Um, just a quick note, I'm going to try to be quick. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, and I found that besides trying to be short, and of course my phone goes off, besides trying to be brief and to the point, I should try to talk a little bit faster. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit faster and try to be a little bit more interesting. So just so you know, we're starting the Revolutionary War part today, and this is interesting. We are starting off, and I will tell you, a lot of this is going to be covered in class or has been covered in class, but this is a chance for you to fill in the notes, answer some questions, get some credit, learn something, hopefully. Good. Here we go. All right. So we started First Continental Congress. We've already talked about, and you should already have the notes filled in for the First Continental Congress and how they urged the colonies to form militias, which are like volunteer groups of citizen soldiers. And I use the analogy of sort of like volunteer fire departments in all of these little towns, but they are preparing to fight instead of to fight fires. All right, these are some examples. They were nicknamed the Minutemen because they were supposed to be ready at a moment's notice. Now, we looked at John Adams's homes. We'll talk about that more later. Oh, this is what I was looking for. Here we go. So in your notes, you should have already filled in up to and including 1774. These blanks here should be the First Continental Congress. If you did not do these ones, and make sure you have, but if not, then what you want to do before you watch this video, although you're already watching this video, I guess, but you could pause and go back. This is what if you're missing those notes, and I know many of you are, this is why. 3.11 is what you need to look at, which is, if you are in the gray group, was in the folder for Monday 12/21. If you're in the cherry group, it was Friday 12/18, way back in 2020. And of course, now we're in 2021. So that's where you should have those three filled in. We're not going to go over them right now. Today, we are doing the next one, 1775, Paul Revere's Ride, and Lexington and Concord, which is actually on either the back or the next flap. I don't remember. But these are the two that we're filling in. Not a lot, so we can go quick. All right, ready now? Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. It was on the 18th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year, but I do. What am I talking about? Well, we're going to talk about Paul Revere's ride. This is Paul Revere. And Paul Revere, this is Paul Revere's house. If you have ever walked the Freedom Trail, that's that stripe right down there, connects all of the historic sites in Boston, or at least many of them. If you've ever done that, you have seen Paul Revere's house. I believe it was the oldest house still existing in Boston. It is now a museum as well. It was built way back in the 1600s. I used to go and play there as a child with Paul. We know Paul Revere because he was a famous artist. Of course, his famous Boston Massacre painting, the Bloody Massacre. These are some of his. And the scene of part of the town of Boston in New England and British ships of war arriving in 1768. We looked at these two. These are some of his other works we have not looked at. You don't need to know them, but this is why Paul Revere was already well known. And Paul Revere was a member of the Sons of Liberty and, more importantly, maybe the Committees of Correspondence. So he was kind of what the kids call a mover and a shaker when it comes to the protests against the British. He was well known. He was an important person. And he's going to become even more famous. I put these out of order. I'll come back to that. He's going to become more famous because of this ride he makes. I'm going way out of order. I meant to move this slide and I didn't. Sorry. All right. This is why he's famous. He was not the only rider that night. He was not the only person who did this. And he was just one of a few. But he becomes famous because, like 100 years later, a poet named Henry Wadsworth Longfellow writes this famous poem, and this is how it goes. I'm not going to do the whole thing, just a bit of it. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April in 75. So, April 18th, 1775. That's what we're talking about. That's when it happened. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the tower tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church tower as a signal light. One if by land and two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, to the country folk to be up and to arm. And then this goes on and on and on. I will, if you in your quiz, there's a version of his poem, which I highly recommend you listen to. I think you will enjoy it. It's only a couple minutes long. It's pretty cool. So, what was this ride? What was it all about? Well, now I'm backing up to here. This is an important map at this time. So, this is Boston. If you look right here, Boston, Old North Church. So, the Boston, this peninsula of Boston, is just swarming with British soldiers. And all around them, there's all of these militias. We talked about this in class, or we will. All these militia groups who are stockpiling weapons and gunpowder and practicing like they're getting ready for a fight. Now, the soldiers in Boston realize they have to do something about this. They can't let these colonists arm themselves and form an army. And what are they going to do? A lot of them have already shown some tendencies to be terrorists, like those Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Those people have resorted to violence before, and they may do it again. So, we have Paul Revere now as a member of the Sons of Liberty and the Committees of Correspondence. They are spying on the British soldiers. They know that the British soldiers are about to make a move. They just don't know when and how. The British soldiers are planning on raiding some of these towns, specifically here in Concord. If you look at Concord way out here, this is about 15 miles or so from Boston. And they are planning to go out here because this was one of their main weapons stockpiles where they have gunpowder and ammunition stored out here. And the soldiers are getting a little nervous. They have to put an end to that. They've also been tipped off that Samuel Adams and John Hancock happen to be staying in Lexington. So they can kill two stones with one bird, as they say. No, they don't say that. I'm just seeing if you're listening. Two stones with one bird. That's cruel. Anyways, they're gonna stop in Lexington and arrest the members of the Sons of Liberty, who are very wanted at this point, and then carry on to Concord and seize the weapons. Now, they're going to do this in the middle of the night, so they catch these Minutemen, these militias, off guard, so they don't know what's going to come, they don't know what's going to hit them even. Except that Paul Revere and his friends are across over here in Charlestown. This is right across the bay here. They have been spying. They know that they have already worked out. The committees of correspondence have this network worked out to spread word to all of these towns. Now, it is not going to be just Paul Revere riding and telling everybody. That would be ridiculous. He and another rider named William Dawes are going to take off. They're the first two. And the way this would work is those two would go and tell, I don't know, I'm making up a number here, let's say 10 people. Then those 10 people would spread out and ride off and tell 10 other people, and so on and so forth, until they would quickly alert the whole countryside, the country folk, to be up and to arm. So that's how the alarm system worked, since there were no text messages or anything like that. Now, the thing is, they don't know which way they're going to go. There's two ways they could go. They could travel by the only road out of Boston here along the neck, or they could go across the river, or as they say, by sea. One if by land, two if by sea. And Paul Revere on the other side will be looking to see if there's one lantern or two hung in the Old North Church here. And when he finds out it's two on the 18th of April in 1775, he takes off riding and alerting the Minutemen that the British are coming, as they say. Anyway, so what's going to happen here is that this is why they were going out there to arrest them. You can pause this if you need to know why. If there happens to say be a question on the quiz asking why the British were heading to Concord, maybe this is the answer right there that you're looking for. All right. Anyways, there's the Old North Church where the lanterns were hung. It's still in existence today. We'll talk about his ride later. So Paul Revere rides out and informs the people that the British troops plan to secretly march from Boston to Concord to capture weapons and leaders of the Sons of Liberty. You can pause this and use this information to fill in your notes. It pretty much, I can't guarantee it 100% lines up, but it pretty much lines up if you look at the underlined words. Paul Revere and others ride ahead and warn that the British are coming. We'll talk about that, specifically what he said later. Not today, in class. This allows the leaders to escape and the militias or the Minutemen to prepare for battle. And battle they do. When the British reach Lexington, which is about 10 to 12 miles outside of Boston, on the village green or the village square, instead of being a surprise attack, they encounter several, well, at least a couple hundred, I don't know exact number, a couple hundred Minutemen, these militias who are there ready to fight. And they stop the British soldiers in the road, and the British soldiers tell them to disband, to go home. There's nothing to see here. Get out of here. There's a standoff. Somebody fires a shot. We do not know who, which side it was. But once that happens, the fighting erupts and there's shooting back and forth. Now, that shot is sometimes called the shot heard around the world, not because it was particularly loud, but because it was the start of the Revolutionary War, which led to the independence of the United States, which ultimately changed the world. So, in Lexington, these are just farmers and people with guns. They're not real soldiers. They start getting some casualties, people getting hit, injured, shot, killed. They mostly take off running and disband. The British soldiers, meanwhile, march on down the road. They march on down the road towards Concord. And we'll talk about these in class, some of these famous paintings. These are primary sources showing the action, made just a week or so later after it actually happened, but by someone who was in this location. And you can see here's the fighting on Lexington, and this is all smoke here. These guns produced a lot of smoke, but you can see the British marching. There's a lot of them coming up the road here, and down here you have the Minutemen running away in many cases. Then they continue on to Concord. They reach Concord, they have to cross a bridge, the Old North Bridge, to get across this river. Unfortunately for the British, there are hundreds of Minutemen on the other side, and they push them back. They're not able to reach quite into Concord because the British, they encounter heavy fighting, and they are forced to retreat. Now, they are about 15 miles from Boston. That's going to take them quite a while to walk all the way back to Boston, especially after they've just marched 15 miles. They got to turn around and go back. And the whole way back, these Minutemen are going to be running after them, hiding behind stone walls, shooting at them, then disappearing, and then coming back up and shooting at them. About 250 British soldiers will be killed during this. And you can see this is what the scene would have looked like. There's a few parts of the road that have been recreated there's a place called Minuteman National Park in Lexington. I'd highly recommend it. And anyways, this leads to this is the start of the Revolutionary War here. So to fill in notes for Lexington and Concord, first battle, shot heard around the world, etc., 200 casualties for the British, about 90 for the colonists. And the British troops are forced to retreat back to Boston. So not a very good start for the British to this war. This is the Old North Church. We'll talk about these a little more in class. All right, and if you missed any of that, this is some propaganda after. Now, this is just to fill in the last part of the notes, Fort Ticonderoga. You know what? We're going to save this one for class, Fort Ticonderoga. So just to give you a little heads up there what it is. But that's it, okay? So you should have those noticles that filled in for Lexington and Concord, not for Second Continental Congress, not for any of this. And even down here, Ethan Allen, the Green Mountain Boys, capture Fort Ticonderoga. You don't really need to have this part yet. So there we go. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you soon.